I think manufacturing is the poster child to explain globalization, but I also think that globalization is over. A lot of countries, a lot of markets are trying to attract manufacturing. And so by attracting manufacturing, you need to build factories. And in many of the countries and markets that want to go into manufacturing, there's actually a scarcity of labor. So they need to automate because they can't get enough labor into their factories. The fastest growing manufacturing market today is actually India. And it's fascinating to see what is happening in India, how many different vertical industries are moving manufacturing there. A very exciting market for us.
Do you think manufacturing will ever reach full automation?
In order to get us to 100%, we need to teach the robots new tricks, and that will require for robots to become intent-based, to become autonomous. Now, will the role of labor change? Will we change how we compensate for that? I actually hope so, because I think it's holding us back today.
There was a time where robots were sci-fi. Today they are commonplace, at least behind the closed doors of manufacturing facilities. Every year, over 500,000 new industrial robots are added to production lines the world over. But innovation, trade, and demographics are rewriting where robots get built and deployed. In fact, the more they integrate with artificial intelligence, the more they become strategic technology. Kuka, the producer of the iconic orange industrial robots, sits at the heart of it all. Its CEO, Christoph Schell, joins us today. Christoph, thank you for being with us. Robotics 1.0 was about the industrial robots that Kuka produces, which took over the past 15, 20 years, the assembly lines of producers worldwide. But now the coalescence of robotic hardware with artificial intelligence is powering up another stage of innovation. Robotics 2.0. Are robots going to break through the gates of factories to take over the wider economy?
Look, I think you're describing our world correctly. Robotics is not a new category, but what has happened in the past is that robots were programmed in a very deterministic way, and that has helped us to automate at a factory level, depending on the industry, I would say up to 90, maybe 92% of all tasks in a factory. In order to get us to 100%, we need to teach the robots new tricks, and that will require for robots to become intent-based, to become autonomous, to take input that they get from sensors like vision and make decisions that can't be made in a deterministic environment. So the deterministic world and the intent-based world are coming together as one. That's the disruption. That's the opportunity.
Are you thinking when you talk about this? Are you thinking that the end point is humanoid robots?
Look, for me, a humanoid is in society today the image that people have in mind when they think about autonomous systems. For me, a humanoid is just a form factor. So I'm not just going down to say, hey, we're going to move from arms to humanoids. That's not it. I think we're moving from deterministic systems to intent-based systems, and some of the form factors will look like humanoids.
So what do you see as the main drivers of growth of your industry? What is really driving the uptake of automation technologies, in your case, industrial automation technologies in this moment in time?
There's a couple of things going on. So number one, when you open the press and you read about it, a lot of countries, a lot of markets are trying to attract manufacturing. And so by attracting manufacturing, you need to build factories. And in many of the countries and markets that want to go into manufacturing, there's actually a scarcity of labor. So they need to automate because they can't get enough labor into their factories. And it's not just invest in Europe or in the US, it's also a topic in China. That's number one. Number two is cost. There's a tremendous cost pressure on manufacturing customers to always lower the cost. And so it's not just how much labor can you afford paying, but it's also how do you automate a process? How do you build the bill of materials? Where do you source your components from? So the world has become very, very complex in this regard. And then thirdly, because we are now talking about intent-based robots, there's also sometimes a question of, well, where do you develop the software? Is it a global software platform, or do you actually have a very market-specific engagement on software that can be geo-fenced as well if required? So basically where we're going from an area that I think has been really global. I think manufacturing is the poster child to explain globalization, but I also think that that globalization is over. We're going to more cocooning. We're going to markets looking at manufacturing as a differentiator and also as a national security question. And so we have to develop our products where our customers are. And you see that in the footprint of Kuka. We are changing how we operate. Where do we do R&D? Where do we do software development? Where do we manufacture? Do we have different bill of materials for the same robot, depending on what market we sell it to? These are the questions we are solving for today.
And you mentioned national security. Kuka was acquired 10 years ago. 2026 marks the 10th anniversary of Kuka's takeover by Midea, this Chinese conglomerate. Needless to say, as you also have pointed out, the world has changed pretty dramatically over the past 10 years. Do you think that the same acquisition would be possible in today's context and landscape?
I don't know. Don't want to speculate about that at all. I have to tell you that, Kuka is an independent company. Yes, we have a shareholder in Midea that is in China, but Kuka is headquartered in Europe, in Augsburg. We have been there for over 125 years. So, that's where our heritage is. This is where a lot of our engineering still sits. But yeah, we obviously do invest in China. China is the largest automation market in the world. And we are growing in China, which is very much required because, all these countries attracting automation also means that some countries are losing automation and are losing manufacturing. So we need to be where our customers are. Being associated to Midea as a company, I think is a very positive for Kuka. Midea has a very long-term plan for Kuka, and we're executing on that plan.
But certainly it must raise sensitivities when you talked about fragmenting of the global value chains, when you talked about R&D, things like intellectual property have now become the ownership and the ultimate owners of intellectual property is becoming very, very sensitive. So how are you trying to stay clear of these sensitivities, particularly when you do business in the US and in Europe?
Look, I mean, I joined Kuka in July of 2025 as the group CEO. I was before that in the technology companies that were US based. And to be honest with you, the same questions were asked by customers. So I don't think necessarily it matters where the company is headquartered today or who the shareholders are. Ultimately, customers demand that a supplier, and particularly a strategic supplier like Kuka, can help them manage risk. And so where do you develop your product? How do you think about data sovereignty? How do you manage data privacy? How do you enable them to have access to product? Look at what is currently happening in the world with a memory shortage for compute. A lot of dependencies again. So every customer asks their suppliers to de-risk and help them manage risk going forward. And that is what we're doing. We have been setting ourselves up in 3 centers of excellence. I would describe them as, in the US, we do a lot of software and AI development. In Europe, we are holding on to our legacy of mechanical engineering and mechatronics. And then in China, we have a really good track record of managing cost out projects, also coming up with local products in the market. There's a very fast innovation cycle there. Sometimes we can bring these products to other markets. Sometimes we don't. But that's really how we're setting up. We're not thinking about ourselves anymore as this centralized R&D and development hub, but really having 3 different hubs that we are fueling with innovation.
And I understand that you are also trying to develop production capacities in the United States. Is that right? Can you give us an update on that?
Yeah, we're looking at where can we increase our footprint. The US is a very important market for us. We have been there for many years. 2 of our top 3 customers are based in the US, and they obviously want us to de-risk their supply chain, and manufacturing or assembling in the US is a very important topic. We also obviously have to deal with the tariffs and have to mitigate impact there. But then, the US is not the only market we're looking at. The fastest growing manufacturing market today is actually India. And it's fascinating to see what is happening in India, how many different vertical industries are moving manufacturing there. Very exciting market for us. So I'm looking into this. And I'm also looking into Africa, to be honest with you. Africa is very cost competitive, and it's a market that we need to have on our radar when it comes to manufacturing, also when it comes to R&D. So we are basically setting the company up in a more diversified global footprint from a manufacturing point of view in order to give options to our customers.
Interesting that you mentioned India. When you refer to India, were you referring to India as a market for your products, but also as a production base?
Both. And I actually think the two work hand in hand. I think, India has a very clear idea that you need to manufacture in India if you want to gain market share, if you want to be considered as a supplier. And that makes sense. They have such an interesting, such a big market. They can demand that. What is very interesting is that when in my conversations in India, it's not enough to just manufacture in India. You then also need to think about sourcing of components locally. And that is something we're looking into. Does this make sense for us? Are there other alternatives? So these are the projects we're currently working. So I'm happy to come back and report out when we're done.
Not without hiccups, but Kuka has become also a top three player in the very competitive Chinese market. There was a time when Frank Sinatra used to sing, "If you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere." Can we apply it to manufacturing in this day and age and say that if you can make it in China, you can make it anywhere?
Yes and no. I think China is teaching you to be very agile, and to be very close to your customers from an engineering point of view. But as I just said, there are certain things that non-Chinese customers don't like. For example, a bill of material that is only based in China, that does not work, or a software development that is only based in China. So you can learn a lot from China, but I think then it becomes very important that you adapt it for different market requirements. And so I think our three center of excellence strategy is the right approach. But of course, we're taking a lot of learnings that we have in China as a best practice into other setups and markets as well.
And Kuka is still headquartered in Augsburg, Germany. You
Yes.
actually recently came to an agreement with your local stakeholders and committed to further your presence there, or committing to basically maintaining your core operations in Augsburg until July 2029. But what does Europe stand for Kuka in 2026?
Also, Europe is where we are headquartered and where we have been headquartered for over 120 years. And I think in those 120 years, Europe, like any other market, had its ups and downs, and Kuka stayed and remained headquartered there. And that's also the approach we took last year when we were negotiating with the union in Germany. We took an approach of, hey, we really want to stay here, but you need to help us. You need to help us to become more productive, to become more competitive, in order for us to justify investments that we have to make. And we ended up reaching that common understanding, which basically means that we are committed to Augsburg as our headquarter. We are also committed to manufacturing in Augsburg. We are investing into modernization and automating our setup there. We're basically drinking our own champagne, if you want. We want to be more automated in order to be cost competitive in Augsburg. But at the same time, I think I also need to emphasize we're a global company. And what we are reacting to right now is that the world is changing. It is moving from a globalization setup to a more local setup. And so we will do that as well. So this means that not all of our products, not all of our R&D will be in Augsburg. It's already today not the case. We will be where our customers are. But there's a lot of skill that Kuka has in Augsburg, a lot of deep understanding of robotics and automation. And we would be foolish to just throw this away.
What would you say are the biggest challenges for manufacturers to remain competitive in the European landscape? And how did you manage to iron out those challenges in your negotiations with your stakeholders?
Look, I mean, if you look at it at the absolute fundamentals, Europe does have a cost problem, and it's not just the cost of labor, it's the cost of electricity, it's the cost of doing business. I also think that our customers in Europe are challenged. Look at the automotive industry. It's an industry that is being disrupted. A lot of new entries into the market, in particular when we talk about autonomous cars or electrical vehicles. that means that there is a shift in the market, and that makes it obviously difficult for some of our customers um, in the European markets to stay competitive. We need to help them, so we need to help them and be there. I had some situations there where I felt that we need to adapt a little bit how we are set up. For example, Salesforce that is not on commission, not very competitive, so we are changing that. And things like that, little things like that need fine tuning. At the end of the day, I think that all the stakeholders that were involved in reaching the consensus, they all had the same thing in mind. We wanted for Kuka to have a really positive future, also in Europe, also in Germany, and also at our headquarters in Kuka in Augsburg, and that's what we rallied together. Is it the most competitive market in the world right now? It is not, but I think it's also our job to contribute in getting it back on track.
As automation accelerates worldwide across sectors, do you think we should tax robots?
Very interesting question. I'm just talking about cost and being competitive. So I will tell you, I look at tax as a cost. And so please, let's not tax robots because there will be one market that doesn't tax them, and then that market will have the upper hand. At the end of the day, however, I also understand we need to bring value to society. And in the past, value was defined by the amount of jobs, the amount of labor that we were able to generate. I think we maybe have to take a different approach. I think it's a question of what services can we bring, what independence can we bring to an economic zone, what level of innovation can we bring, how do we work together with education, with think tanks, with entities that are really into R&D, because that's what I'm really talking about. The amount of innovation that is pouring into Kuka from a software-defined infrastructure point of view, from an AI-defined infrastructure point of view, that should not just have value for Kuka, that should have value for society. And where we are, that's really what it is all about. How can we foster that and build competency that goes way beyond just Kuka?
So, looking forward, what is the future of work that you envision? You are in the thick of it. You are producing the robots that produce the goods that everyone consumes. But up until now, we were all living in a wage-based society and economy where wages would pay for our consumption. As the rate of automation and jobs replacement accelerates, what is the role that you expect human labor to play in the future economy?
Look, I think that human labor will always be required in the value chain. I do, however, believe that the more manual part of that labor in a manufacturing process, that will continue to diminish. But I do believe that there are going to be, at the same time, huge opportunities to shift more into defined infrastructure, software-defined infrastructure capabilities. A lot of this has to do with software, with coding, with AI, with services that can be built around factories, built around automation. So the type of roles are going to change. But it's not the first time that as mankind, as society, we're going through this. Just think about the Industrial Revolution. When we went from agriculture to Industrial Revolution, we then start to talk about Industry 3.0, Industry 4.0. Now we are just at another level of this industrial segment to develop, and we have to adapt. There will be value that will be created outside of manufacturing, and this is where mankind has to participate. Now, will the role of labor change? Will we change how we compensate for that? I actually hope so, because I think it's holding us back today, and I think we should approach of more of a value add type of viewpoint to also how we compensate for services that are rendered by humans.
Christoph Schell, CEO of Kuka, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you everyone for watching. You can like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or else follow us on fdiintelligence.com. Until the next time.